Helen Brooks sat back in her chair, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the linen cloth. She wasn't speaking. Neither was he. Across from her, Aaron Blake's eyes stayed fixed on the glass of water between them, as though he were afraid to lift his gaze. For a long moment there was no sound except the soft hum of the city outside. Faint traffic, the whisper of night wind against tall windows. It was the kind of silence that pressed down heavy and unresolved. Something had shifted in that room. Something no one at the restaurant could have predicted when the two first walked in. The powerful woman in her 60s, the young man with worn shoes and a suit that didn't quite fit. The other tables had emptied. Waiters had begun clearing, glancing over, curious but cautious. No one dared interrupt. Helen's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She had faced shareholders, boardrooms, and hostile takeovers without flinching. But this silence, across from this young man, felt different. It felt personal. And Aaron Blake, for all his youth, looked like someone carrying more years than his age should allow. His shoulders hunched, not in disrespect, but in a quiet resignation, as though he already knew the world expected nothing from him. The dinner had begun hours ago with polite smiles and hesitant words, but it hadn't stayed polite. Somewhere along the way, something was said, something that could not be unsaid. And now, here they were. Two lives that had collided against every expectation, sitting in a silence that seemed to hold the weight of judgment, of possibility, of everything left unsaid. And before anyone could understand how they had come to this strange, unsettling pause, the story had already begun. Back then, it started simply, with a woman who had everything, and nothing, and a man who had almost given up. Long before that dinner, Helen Brooks lived in a world most people only glimpsed through glass towers. Her name sat in headlines, her company's stock value discussed on news channels. Boardrooms straightened when she entered, voices lowered when she raised a hand. Yet when the day ended and the office lights dimmed, her home was quiet. She had been divorced for almost 15 years. The papers had been signed in silence, the marriage unraveling long before the ink dried. Friends told her she was better off. They said power and marriage rarely lived comfortably under the same roof. But late at night, Helen would sit in her living room, glass of wine untouched, television flickering, and feel the walls press in. She had learned the art of commanding respect. She had not learned the art of filling silence. Her children were grown now. One lived in Chicago, the other overseas. They called on holidays, sent flowers on her birthday, but life had taken them where she could not follow. She was proud of them, but pride is not the same as presence. At 63, she carried herself with grace, crisp suits, measured words, and the reputation of a woman who could not be rattled. But when she caught her reflection in the mirror, in the hours no one else saw, she sometimes paused. Behind the tailored lines of her jacket, behind the practiced smile of leadership, there was a woman who remembered laughter in kitchens, summer evenings on porches, and a voice beside her at night. A woman who had once believed life would slow down with age, not grow lonelier. Helen Brooks was not unhappy, but she was unaccompanied. The company filled her hours. The accolades filled her shelves. Yet there was a question she never answered aloud. Who fills me? That question lingered like the scent of old perfume, faint, persistent, and impossible to ignore. And perhaps it was that question, more than her wealth, more than her title, that would one day lead her to invite a young man, half her age, to dinner. Not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for something else. Something she couldn't yet name. While Helen Brooks moved between boardrooms and corner offices, Aaron Blake's world was stitched together from smaller, harsher places. He was 28, but life had already weathered him. His shoes carried the marks of too many streets, his hands the calluses of too many short-lived jobs. Some weeks he stocked shelves at the grocery store. Other weeks he loaded trucks at dawn, his back aching before noon. And when hours dried up, he patched together deliveries, odd errands, anything that kept the rent just barely paid. Aaron didn't complain much. Complaining never paid bills. He learned early that the world kept moving whether he shouted or stayed quiet. So he chose quiet. The apartment he lived in was small, one room that held both a bed and a fold-out table. The radiator groaned more than it worked, and the windows stuck each winter. But it was his. A place where, when he closed the door, no one could see the weight of failure written across his shoulders. People didn't ask about his past, and he rarely offered. His father had left when Aaron was 12, his mother working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. College had been a dream that slipped away after the first semester. the tuition bill louder than his ambition. Friends from high school had moved on. Some married, some climbing steady jobs, others gone to cities he couldn't afford to visit. When they met again, years later, their small talk carried a quiet sting. "So, what are you up to now?" He would smile, change the subject, and swallow the truth. But behind that practiced smile, there was a man who hadn't stopped caring. He still walked his neighbor's dog when she was sick. He still mailed birthday cards to his younger sister, even if all he could spare was a $5 bill inside. Aaron Blake was broke, but he wasn't empty. And sometimes when the night was still and his thoughts pressed too close, he wondered if that mattered. If goodness without success had any place in the world at all. It was in those quiet, doubtful hours that his path would unexpectedly cross with Helen Brooks. Two lives moving on opposite ends of the spectrum, heading toward a dinner that neither of them could have predicted. It happened on a night like any other. The city streets were restless with traffic, neon signs buzzing against the early evening air. Helen Brooks had finished another long day at the office. A meeting had stretched past sunset, her driver delayed, and for once she decided not to wait. She walked. Aaron Blake, meanwhile, was leaving the back entrance of a hotel. He had taken a temporary job washing dishes in the kitchen. The shift was hard, the pay small, but it was something. His apron was folded under his arm, his shirt damp from steam, his thoughts already drifting toward the walk home. They might have passed without notice. Two strangers moving in opposite directions, one with her heels clicking on pavement, the other with worn shoes pressing against cracks in the sidewalk. But fate has a way of leaning in when no one expects it. Helen paused outside a restaurant, not the kind she usually chose, but quiet, tucked between taller buildings. She stood there a moment, debating whether to step inside alone. A woman of her stature, dining by herself, always seemed to invite glances she did not want. Aaron was nearby, trying to fix the strap of his bag, when he noticed her. He knew her face. Not personally, but from the newspaper articles he sometimes skimmed at the library. Helen Brooks, the CEO whose company name was etched across skyscrapers. He hesitated, then nodded politely. Just a small gesture, the kind one offers a stranger without expecting acknowledgement. But Helen, perhaps tired of silence, returned the nod. And then, unexpectedly, she spoke. "Do you know if this place is any good?" Her voice was calm, but there was a faint vulnerability in the question. Aaron blinked, surprised she had spoken to him. "I've heard the food's decent," he answered, his tone respectful, uncertain if he should say more. She studied him for a moment, the tired shirt, the worn shoes, the quiet humility in his voice. And then, almost on impulse, she said the words that would surprise them both. "Why don't you join me?" For a heartbeat, Aaron thought he had misheard. Join her? A CEO? A woman whose world was carved from power and polished marble? He almost refused, the instinct of someone who didn't belong. But Helen Brooks didn't flinch. She waited, her eyes steady, as if she had already decided that the table inside should not be set for one. And so, with hesitation wrapped in disbelief, Aaron Blake followed her through the door. It began not with romance, not with spectacle, but with a simple invitation, offered in a moment of quiet courage. A dinner neither of them could have foreseen. The hostess glanced twice when Helen Brooks gave her name and then gestured to the young man at her side. But she said nothing, only led them toward a quiet corner, where the light was softer and the hum of conversation felt distant. Helen chose her seat carefully, facing the window where the city lights painted faint reflections across the glass. Aaron Blake sat opposite her, his posture careful, almost too careful, as though he might break some unspoken rule by leaning too far forward. Menus were handed out, candles lit. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, not yet, but it carried weight. Helen opened the menu with ease, though she already knew she would barely taste whatever arrived. She had eaten in finer restaurants, in grander halls, yet tonight felt different. Less about food, more about the meaning of simply sitting across from someone unexpected. Aaron glanced at the menu, his eyes moving quickly over prices that made his stomach tighten. He thought of his wallet, the bills folded thin inside. Then he remembered, she had invited him. Still, the numbers printed on that paper felt like another reminder of how far their worlds were apart. Helen noticed. She had spent a lifetime reading board members' faces, sensing hesitation in a shareholder's silence. She saw the flicker in Aaron's eyes, the quick retreat of someone trying not to reveal discomfort. "You don't need to worry about that," she said softly, almost before she realized the words had left her lips. "This is my invitation." Aaron looked up, his expression caught between gratitude and pride. He wanted to refuse, to insist he could manage, but the truth pressed down on him. He couldn't. Not tonight. So he nodded quietly. "Thank you." It was a simple exchange, but it shifted the air between them. The formality softened. The ground, uneven as it was, became a little steadier. The waiter returned. Orders were placed, hers calm, his hesitant. Then, as glasses were poured and the table set, Helen leaned back, studying him. "Tell me about yourself," she said, not as a command, but as an invitation. Aaron hesitated. People rarely asked, and when they did, they often regretted hearing the truth. But her eyes were steady, expectant, and for reasons he couldn't name, he found himself wanting to answer. The dinner had begun, not with grand gestures, not with laughter or sparks, but with two people, worlds apart, daring to sit across from each other in the glow of candlelight, and with a question that would open more than either of them expected. It didn't take long for others to notice. Restaurants, especially quiet ones, have a way of drawing eyes toward the unusual. And tonight, the unusual was a 63-year-old CEO dining with a man young enough to be her son. The hostess, discreet as she tried to be, glanced over more than once. A couple at a nearby table whispered behind their menus, their conversation bending in curiosity. Even the waiter, though professional, carried a flicker of surprise in his expression each time he approached. Helen Brooks felt it. She always felt it. A lifetime in leadership had sharpened her awareness of being watched, measured, judged. Normally, she wore that attention like armor. Tonight, however, she felt something different. It wasn't the public she wanted to impress. It was the quiet man across from her, who seemed more uncomfortable with the stares than she was. Aaron Blake noticed too. His shoulders tightened each time someone's eyes lingered. He stirred his water glass, adjusted his fork, looked down at the tablecloth. He had lived most of his life beneath notice. Now, all at once, he was the subject of it. "People are looking," he murmured, not quite meeting her gaze. Helen's response was calm, steady. "Let them." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed into the air between them. For a moment, Aaron looked up. She wasn't dismissing the stares. She was defying them. It was the same tone she might have used to silence a boardroom filled with doubters. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. Across the room, laughter broke out at another table. To Aaron, it felt like it was aimed at him, though reason told him otherwise. He shifted in his chair, his pride wrestling with his unease. Helen noticed again. She always noticed. "You don't owe them anything," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on his. He swallowed, his throat tight. For someone who had spent years invisible, being seen, truly seen, was almost harder than being ignored. The whispers continued, soft and speculative. Some thought it a scandal, others a curiosity. But the truth, the one that no one in that room could have guessed, was far quieter. It was simply two people, sitting across from each other, trying to bridge a distance measured not only in years and wealth, but in loneliness. And as the night pressed on, the weight of judgment outside their table began to fade. What mattered was not who was watching, but what was being slowly revealed between them. The first course arrived with quiet ceremony. A plate set before Helen Brooks, another before Aaron Blake. Silverware gleamed against linen, glasses caught the faint glow of candlelight. For a time, they ate in silence. Not the strained silence of strangers, but the kind that comes when both are searching for a way forward. Helen was the first to speak again. "You remind me of someone," she said softly, her fork resting at the edge of her plate. Aaron glanced up, cautious. "Someone you know?" She shook her head. "Someone I used to know, a long time ago." Her words carried weight, but she didn't explain further. Instead, she studied him, the way his hands hesitated over each bite, the way he measured every word as though the wrong one might cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. Aaron cleared his throat. "I don't belong here," he admitted quietly, surprising even himself. "Not at this table, not across from you." Helen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And yet, here you are." The words lingered, simple but undeniable. Aaron shifted, his pride stirring again. "You don't understand. People like me, we don't get invited to dinners like this. We're lucky if someone remembers our name." Helen leaned back, her eyes narrowing not in judgment but in thought. "Names can be forgotten," she said, "but presence cannot. You're here, Aaron Blake, and whether you believe it or not, you matter at this table." He blinked, taken aback. No one had ever spoken his name like that before, with weight, with intention. It felt less like a fact and more like a promise. The conversation drifted, not in grand revelations, but in small exchanges. childhood memories, workdays gone wrong. Books neither had finished. Each detail, modest on its own, built a bridge between them. Helen laughed once, quietly, unexpectedly, at a story Aaron told about delivering groceries to the wrong house. The sound startled even her, so unused had she become to laughter at her own table. And Aaron, for the first time that evening, smiled without restraint. Around them, the whispers still lingered. But within the space of that table, something else was forming. Not romance. Not yet. Something gentler. Something rarer. It was the fragile beginning of being seen and of seeing back. And as the plates were cleared, both Helen Brooks and Aaron Blake knew the dinner was no longer about food at all. It was about truth, waiting to be spoken. The waiter poured the next glass of wine, set fresh plates before them, and slipped away. For a while, the rhythm of the dinner felt almost natural. Two people sharing a table, voices rising and falling in quiet conversation. But then came the shift. The kind of turn no one prepares for, though perhaps it was inevitable. Helen Brooks mentioned her company, almost in passing. A new merger, a decision made that morning. It was not a boast, not even an intentional subject. For her, business was simply the language she lived in, the air she breathed. Aaron Blake listened, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. A company worth billions, decisions that affected thousands. And here he was, a man who had worried about paying his rent just that morning. Something tightened in his chest. He set his fork down slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile air between them. "You talk about money like it's air," he said, his voice low. "Like it's just there, everywhere. For people like me, it's not air. It's fire. It burns through everything." Helen froze, her expression unreadable. She wasn't offended. Not exactly. But the words struck her, precise as arrows. Aaron leaned back, his pride simmering. "I wash dishes. I load trucks. I take whatever I can get, and half the time it's still not enough. You talk about investments. I talk about overdue bills. Tell me how that makes sense, us sitting here." The silence that followed was different now. No longer heavy with curiosity, but sharp with contrast. Helen's lips parted, but no words came. She had faced critics in boardrooms, skeptics on television, yet none of them had spoken with the rawness of this young man sitting across from her. Finally she exhaled, her voice measured. "Do you think I don't know loss? That money shields a person from pain?" Aaron looked up, startled by the firmness in her tone. "I may not worry about rent," she continued, her eyes steady, "but I know what it means to be left. To come home to silence. To build walls because no one else will stand with you. Don't think the absence of money makes suffering more real. Pain has many currencies." Her words lingered, sharp but true. Aaron's shoulders dropped slightly, his anger fading into something else. Recognition, perhaps, or shame. He hadn't meant to wound her. He had only meant to be heard. And for the first time he realized she was not untouchable. She, too, carried weight. Different from his, yes, but heavy all the same. The candles flickered as if disturbed by a wind neither could see. The table between them felt both bridge and barrier. And though the dinner did not end, something within both Helen Brooks and Aaron Blake had cracked open, a truth neither had intended to reveal. The tension lingered between them like smoke, not suffocating, but present, the kind of air that holds the memory of fire. Aaron Blake shifted in his seat, eyes down, hands restless on the tablecloth. For a long moment he said nothing. Pride told him to stay silent, to let the night end with dignity intact. But something about Helen Brooks, her steadiness, her unflinching gaze, pressed against the walls he had built. So he spoke, quietly at first, then with the slow rhythm of a man peeling back layers he rarely allowed anyone to see. "My father left when I was 12, he began, his voice almost a whisper. "Just walked out. No note, no explanation. My mom worked herself to the bone after that. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. She used to come home so tired she'd fall asleep in her uniform, still smelling of bleach from the diner." Helen listened, her posture still, her eyes never leaving him. Aaron swallowed hard. "College was supposed to be my way out. I wanted to study architecture, build something that lasted. But after 1 semester the bills came, and I couldn't keep up. I dropped out before the debt swallowed me whole." He paused, his jaw tight. "Since then, it's been jobs no one remembers, work that leaves nothing behind. People look at me and see a failure. Sometimes, I see it too." The admission hung in the air, heavier than the candle smoke, heavier than the whispers from other tables. Helen's expression softened. Not pity, she would never offer that, but something deeper, quieter. Recognition. Aaron continued, his voice steadier now. I send what I can to my younger sister. She's in nursing school. Smarter than me. Stronger too. I don't want her to carry the same weight. If I can give her even the smallest chance, then maybe none of this was wasted. He stopped there, realizing he had said more than he ever intended. His chest rose and fell, the words leaving him both lighter and exposed. For a moment, Helen Brooks didn't answer. She let the silence hold, not as judgment, but as respect. Then, gently, she spoke. "You're not invisible, Aaron Blake. Not to me. Not tonight." The words landed softly, but they carried the kind of power no headline, no boardroom, no paycheck could rival. And in that quiet corner of the restaurant, for the first time in years, Aaron felt the weight on his shoulders shift. Not gone, not erased, but shared. It was not love, not yet, but it was understanding. And sometimes, that is where everything begins. And so, the night ended not with answers, but with something rarer. Two people, Helen Brooks and Aaron Blake, walked out of that restaurant, carrying truths neither had expected to share. For her, it was the quiet reminder that wealth does not shield the heart from loneliness. For him, it was the discovery that even in his struggle, his presence held value. What shocked everyone was not the dinner itself, but how two lives, separated by decades and worlds apart, could find in one another a reflection they had long forgotten to seek. Sometimes the most unexpected invitations are not about food or formality or appearances. Sometimes they're about being seen, perhaps for the very first time. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Helen Brooks' journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Helen Brooks' name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.